Welcome to Behind the Build. I am your host, Jonathan Jacobs, and today I have with me a gentleman who is in town from out of town, Canadian living abroad, running a really interesting practice called Half Climate Design. I have with me Kelly Alvarez Doran.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Kelly and I were introduced via kind gentleman Evan Saskin at Blue Lion Building, and we had an initial conversation. It was a couple months ago.
Yep.
And he has been integral in many things, none of which I will describe. I will allow him to do. So, Kelly, why don't you tell us a little bit about? Start off actually by telling us what your practice is, and then from there, let's go back and do what I typically do and kind of go through the
Trajectory
of life.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an architect and co-founded Half Climate Design 3 years ago. And as a company kind of emerged organically from some of the research and policy work that we were doing at the University of Toronto and with the City of Toronto. And we recognized that there was a real need in the marketplace right now to help architects and cities and governments really understand the full impacts of construction. And so the work we do is work with designers and help understand, the carbon impacts and the financial impacts of your design decisions, and with builders and with policymakers as well. How can policies change, and how can we get the right policies in place that encourage a lower carbon, lower cost form of construction?
Something that you anticipated doing when you were 3.
Not at all. Yeah. Very roundabout. I never thought I'd become a sustainability consultant, that's for sure.
Okay, so I understand largely what it is that the practice does, and in some capacity how you fulfill that. We'll go more into that. But so why don't you take us back to the kind of the beginning of life, and what did your interest look like? What path did you take to get to where you are?
Yeah, I'm born and raised Winnipegger. I think coming out of high school, I was not totally sure what I wanted to do. I went to university for a couple of years, and then took a year off and moved to Ireland to travel Europe and learn how to work hard, and spent a good year abroad, and then came back and entered the department at the University of Manitoba in the architecture department. It's kind of when I realized I wanted to design. I was always interested in it, and I think thinking about why and how I became an architect, I think my dad would always watch This Old House, which I think was a TV show that I loved, like seeing how things get built and the people that are engaged in them and the factory tours they would take. And I think over time, I realized like I was decent at drawing. I was interested in these things, and so entered architecture school at the University of Manitoba, and then eventually moved here to Toronto to do my grad school at Toronto. And I think what drew me towards this was my desire to help make things, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so when you were young, like, were you either playing with Lego or
Yeah,
Playmobil, or
definitely had a lot of Lego, a lot of boats that didn't float in bathtubs made out of Lego. My former boss, Alan, always joked like he was the one person that wrote his letter for grad school that didn't start off with a story about Lego. I imagine like 3/4 of the applications to architecture schools have some form of a Lego story.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of Lego, certainly.
There was also the other form of construction. It wasn't Lego. I can't remember what it was called. It's like it was like Lego, but you could build bigger things, and it had like shocks as a part of like some of the.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was called.
The Meccano.
Oh yeah, no, there wasn't Meccano.
Yeah,
Other one.
and with wood blocks, and I think I don't know. We just growing up, my parents' business. They were with a stained glass company.
Okay.
It's always making stuff.
Cool.
building windows, building lamps. Doing that kind of thing, working with your hands. So I think always making things. Or I think that making or drawing. That's probably what drew me to doing what I'm doing. Yeah.
Before we go any further, I just want to tell you something briefly. The ads that we have in the podcast aren't just like spam ads coming at you. Okay. We build and we vet the suppliers that we work with. And when we started this podcast, we really wanted to ensure that we were reaching out to the right suppliers that we work with, that we trust and deliver. And each week, the ads are brand new, catered directly to the conversation with some level of anecdotal stories about the suppliers that we work with. So, with that said, in the conversation with Kelly, one of the most striking points was his description of aluminum doors and windows as the red meat of construction. Incredibly useful, but carbon intensive. That doesn't mean that we can avoid them completely, but it does mean we need to make smarter choices. That's where the doors comes in. Their lineup isn't just about aesthetics, it's about longevity and performance. Choosing a high quality insulated door or a well engineered window means lower heating and cooling costs, fewer replacements over the decades, and less carbon and waste over the building's life. And they offer a great deal of choice in your windows. You could have vinyl, fiberglass, aluminum wood clad, and full wood or steel. In my own projects, I've seen how better glazing and carefully chosen frames makes a real difference. It's not about perfection. No window or door is zero carbon. But it's about buying well, buying once, and letting those choices carry forward for years. If you're building or renovating, the Doors has options that help you get it right. And they're beautiful, durable, and better for your home's performance. If you want to learn more, email me and I'll introduce you to Martin, Marta, and their fantastic team. It's Jonathan, Jonathan, at waldenhomes.ca, and I'll set up the intro to the Doors. But for now, back to Kelly.
And were you always proficient with sciences and maths, or?
This guy's good at math, yeah. Decent at math. Good at math, good at science. Decent student, I guess. But finally found something I wanted to apply myself in, eventually.
So yes, so you were saying before, so you came back to Toronto, U of T.
Yeah.
And what was that like? At that point, because I know you're living abroad with your wife and kids.
Yep.
Had you met at that point?
So I guess, yeah, short timeline. I came and started grad school here. I graduated in 2008 with Evan, with a few other people, and then I spent the better part of 3 years working here with a couple firms. Then I moved abroad. I'd met my wife, who's from Toronto, and she was starting her PhD in London, and I was like, well, I could move with you and work there. But then the firm I was working for, which is now SVN, formerly Planning Alliance and Replan, said, why don't you just keep working for us? We have all this work overseas with the mining sector. And I'm like, wow, yeah, let's do that. So I spent the better part of 2 years basically working on mine sites around all Canadian-owned companies in Zambia, Mongolia, Turkey, Panama, Ghana, and in all these places. Basically, the question was, we're building a new mine. Inevitably, there's people that live there. We're going to resettle them. There's like really kind of ways that has to be done through World Bank requirements. And so part of that resettlement process was helping to envision what the new community would look like and designing the community, designing housing. Or on the other side of it is like, oh, we have a mine and now our workforce is going to like double or triple.
Right.
And now where are we going to house all the people that are moving to work here?
Right. So you're redesigning essentially two different communities every single time mine's going to go.
Exactly. Like around every mine is a community. I mean, Sudbury, Timmins are two great examples of that. And the work was, fascinating. I think beginning to kind of really understand the role of resource development and urbanism and architecture and how they're connected. And then after that, I spent a stint teaching, and my wife was wrapping up her PhD and wanted to move to Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, for her field. I'm like, okay, I guess, well, let's move to Africa. I met one of the guys that started this firm called Mass Design Group in Boston, and they're like, we're looking for somebody to lead our office in Rwanda. I was like, oof, okay. That was not the country I had on my list. What I knew about Rwanda 15 years ago. So I think most people at that time thinking about Romeo Dallaire and the genocide and that. But then the more I looked into the company and the more I thought about what Rwanda had to offer, we ended up moving to Rwanda 11 years ago.
Wow.
And then lived there for the better part of 5 years, working across Africa. And that was just transformative of really thinking about how what it means to build and how to build and who's involved in things of completely different context.
Well, and access to materials is
Yep.
just, I could not imagine.
Everything completely,
Workforce, like all of everything.
everything completely had to unlearn everything I'd learned up until then. And then we moved back to London 7 years ago to have our first child, and my wife's job's based there. So I've been working on Zoom now for the better part of 7.5 years. First with Mass, and now HEF.
Okay.
One of the big takeaways from my conversation with Kelly is that every decision we make has a carbon impact. Don't skip this, listen to this, because appliances are no exception. The reality is we all need them. But the smartest choice is to buy once, buy well, and invest in products that are efficient, durable, and won't end up in a landfill in a few years. That's exactly why, for the last few decades, we've trusted Kaplan's Appliances. They've been helping homeowners and builders make thoughtful appliance decisions for generations. And they've done so with the architecture and design community. In my own home, we made a commitment to go all electric. No gas, no compromises. Our kitchen is fully electric with high efficiency appliances that perform incredibly well and align with how we want to live. That's where Kaplan's was invaluable. They helped me cut through the noise, compare real options, and choose products that weren't just beautiful but made sense for the long run. So if you're making choices about your home or your client's home, whether it's one appliance or a whole kitchen, laundry room, I'd encourage you to take that same thoughtful approach. Talk to Kaplan's. They'll make sure you find appliances that fit your lifestyle, save energy, and stand the test of time. Email me. It's Jonathan, Jonathan, at waldenhomes.ca, and I'll set you up with an introduction to their fantastic team to get you started. Now, back to Kelly.
And what of the time zones that exist, which is the most common time zone for your life?
Greenwich Mean Time. Yeah, it's good. It's good. You're 5 hours ahead of Toronto, so you get the morning to yourself to work, and then you do 3-4 hours of calls in the afternoon.
Right. And is a lot of the work that you're dealing with in Toronto, or is it also the US, or do you have stuff in Europe?
We've had some stuff we've had a couple projects in the UK, have a project in Rwanda right now as well, but the bulk of our work is in Canada. I think primarily what we're doing is helping Canada catch up with a lot of practice that's happened elsewhere. I learned all about this in life cycle assessment, embodied carbon, whole life carbon, passive ventilation. These are all things that I learned through practicing in Africa, and then moving to Europe and seeing it's happening there. A lot of countries are requiring these kind of reporting on these things as part of as a requirement of building. And then looking back at Canada 5 years ago, in the middle of COVID, or COVID had just happened, so it was basically spring 2020. In this moment where I'm like, okay, I have a lot of climate anxiety right now. I partially have because I got a young son. There's a few things that had come across in my inbox, in the previous months or so from my professional body. Basically that one email really set me off, which was an email saying, hey, to meet our 2030 targets, here are 4 different ways of building the walls in a residential project. And one of them was just completely filled with petrochemicals. And I kind of saw this document. I'm like, well, clearly there's a real big blind spot right now in our collective understanding around embodied carbon and the emissions related to the materials we're building with. And we need to change this. And so I wrote the OAA, we have to, how do we get this as part of our continuing education? And then I approached the University of Toronto, said I'd really be interested in teaching students how to do this.
Teaching them remotely.
And because it was COVID, the interim dean, Robert Wright, said, yeah, sure, we'd love that. And it was an opportunity to kind of don't tell me, show me. So
was the course that you end up teaching, was it a net new course, or was it modified from an existing course?
Totally new. It was an option studio. So at Daniels, it's the third year of the master's degree, your last year. The main course is studio, and so I got to teach one of the studios, and they bring in people from around the world or around the city typically. And so COVID, they opened, geography wasn't a problem at that point at all. So they gave me an option studio. So I had 10 students or so. 10 students in that year for the whole year for 8 hours a week, basically. And that was the first year of called it the half studio, which the idea of the studio was, okay, it's 2020. There's overall the Paris Agreement is predicated on to get to net zero in 2050. We need to have our emissions by 2030. And so it's like, well, forget any zero by 30 years. Like that's far too far away. Humans are procrastinators. If we just think about the decade we're in right now and the action that has to be immediate, how do we have the emissions of like construction of buildings in this 10 years? Because I'll have all the clues how we might get to zero, right? So that's the idea of half and the half studio, which started out as a academic project. And the city of Vancouver had recently put together a benchmarking study, which is the first question, if you're going to half anything, is like half of what, right? If you're going to die, you're going to weigh yourself. And so the city of Vancouver was weighing itself, and it went out and commissioned a benchmarking study of, I think, roughly 30 multi-unit residential buildings, which, by and large is what's getting built. And I saw that. I'm like, well, why don't we just do that for Toronto? And called up, 10 firms. A couple of friends helped me connect with a couple of architects. BDP was one of the ones in the first year. And I said, can you give me a building? Can you give me one of your recently completed or in the ground buildings for our students to look at them? And that semester was amazing because I think for the students, it was new. For me, I had taught myself how to do this and teaching them. And then for every practice that we engaged had never heard of this before either. Like the words embodied carbon were not a part of my education, in 2008. And, all the people we were working with had no idea what this was either. So it was a real group learning experience. And then through that, at the end of that semester, we had some data, we had findings, and we took it to the city of Toronto and said, all right, here's the elephant in the room. Like, we've done a lot of great work through the green standards on operational emissions. But like in Ontario right now, if you're doing the right things like you've done with your house here and get it near full electrified, the emissions of your house is not its operations, it's in its construction.
Yes.
And so we need to, how do we do this? And then that ultimately, I don't know, it's kind of snowballed into a company 3 years later.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you were creating the company, had you kind of established for yourself what the mantra of the company is going to be? Had you thought about, here's where we'll be able to get our first few clients?
Yeah. Well, so I took the data, the origin story here to answer that question a bit. We took the data from that first 10 buildings and took it to the city of Toronto and said, yeah, here's that elephant in the room. And Lisa King said, yeah, you're right. Let's do something about this. And let's take your 10 buildings and let's make it 50. Kind of broaden the benchmarking. We co-wrote a grant to the Atmospheric Fund, and over the course of a year engaged the broader industry, other architects, other engineers, other developers. If you've done a life cycle assessment, can you give us your data? How do we begin to benchmark this? And
what do you quantify? Sorry, I apologize for digressing, but what do you quantify as the lifespan?
The life cycle. So a lot of what we've been doing is bring life cycle assessment to construction. And so life cycle assessment is a basic methodology to understand anything about something's life. And so my coffee cup here, for example, one of the things we measure is its carbon footprint, right? And so you can measure the carbon footprint of this coffee cup. And for those listening, it's a beautiful glass coffee cup. I think it's a Bodum or something like that. That's got a bit of a vacuum in it. So how the carbon footprint of this glass you would do through a life cycle assessment methodology, which really begins to say, okay, well, what is it made of? Where did that material come from? How was it processed and made into this coffee cup? What transportation did it take to get to the store, to your house? And every one of those things over the life of the glass, and then what happens to the glass during its use, and then ultimately at some future state, hopefully it doesn't get thrown out because you don't throw things out, but you recycle it, etc. Right? And that, like, we have life cycles. Your guitar has a life cycle. Everything in this room has a life, right? And you can measure the impacts across that life through life cycle assessment. And so with a coffee cup, you can imagine that's fairly straightforward, this glass one, or a porcelain one, or what you might have at home. And a building, though, has got hundreds of more things in it, right? And so it's the aggregation of all of that. And so right now, like the main drivers of a building's cost or its emissions or its structure, its envelope, its mechanical systems.
Right.
And so it's very analogous to cost. So, if you're putting a cost estimate together, instead of putting dollar bills per square foot or per cubic meter of this or that, or linear foot, you just have a carbon coefficient per that same quantum. And so that's why cost and carbon are really analogous, and it's really, really not complicated. And what we're trying to do is, a big part of what we're doing is training people how to do this, because it's not hard. And if we're all doing it, we're all going to be making better decisions together. And the more we're all doing that, then we can really drive a market towards lower carbon materials.
And does that mean, though, that over the course of the construction of the products are going to cost more because they're more what the buzzword of sustainable?
Well, so I think there's a somewhat widely held belief that a greener building is going to be more expensive, and I fundamentally disagree. I think that
That's the question.
Yeah.
To debunk it.
So I think the main things that are going to drive the cost of your building is how much materials you're putting into that building for every square foot or square meter you're building, right? And so the things that can drive down the emissions related to your building are through design and through engineering, is to go, leaner, more efficient structures and using lower carbon materials. Those are basically the two principles that you want to employ, right? And so, limiting, the materials that are most carbon intensive are metals. You can imagine all the mines I used to work on in Africa and Mongolia and Asia. What are they? They're producing copper, zinc, aluminum, steel. That they're all coming from a hole in the ground, and you can imagine it takes a lot of energy and a lot of emissions related to, digging that ore out of the ground and smelting it and processing it and extruding it, etc. So the highest carbon material in our buildings is aluminum.
For those wondering, Kelly's currently pointing at the doors.
Bring your doors and windows, and we use it. There's a lot of aluminum for the reasons it's lightweight, it's strong, and it's non-corrosive, and that's why it's kind of ubiquitous. Wasn't really, not 100 years ago. 100 years ago, you wouldn't see aluminum in your building.
Right.
So that's the highest on the kind of food pyramid of carbon. Metals are at the top.
Failing on that one already.
Well, same with copper, though. Steel, with all these things, like to talk like a food pyramid. They're the kind of beef and red meat at the top of the food pyramid in terms of what you shouldn't be eating it every day, like necessarily. Like, have a Wagyu steak, but don't eat it for 3 meals a day, right? And then at the bottom of the food pyramid, in construction terms, are things that grow, right? Like wood and straw and hemp and materials that can grow in farms and forests. And you don't have to mine, you don't have to overly process them, right? So those are the lowest carbon materials. And then in the middle, it's like cement and mineral walls and things like that. So it's kind of spectrum. And so you see it that way, and it's like any diet, you want a kind of a balanced diet, but you should probably be eating more fruits and veg. And how do we get our buildings, to do that? And, at the scale of small residential in Canada, that's really straightforward. We used to, most house construction, 100 years ago, I'm just thinking, the houses on your street here, wood framed houses with brick exteriors and probably a wood frame windows initially. They're quite low carbon in their construction. So, the brick would be
and really well built.
Yeah, well built, and obviously, built to last.
Yeah.
And so like we have this in our DNA. Like we used to insulate. I don't know what you took your building back down to the studs. I'd be curious to know what was insulated with. Not much. And when we used to insulate
double with brick, right?
The brick was doing the work.
Yeah.
A lot of older homes use a lot of like cellulose or paper or even wool and horsehair.
Newspaper here and there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we used to build out of this stuff, and I think how we get back, I think how we work with the materials of our grandparents with the technology of today is really where the future construction could be going.
Well, so you said something pretty much almost in passing there. I think will resonate with me, probably could resonate with anyone else that may or may not have heard it. And that was that you think about the way what you're eating. You got to eat more fruits and veg. I mean,
Yeah.
you think about that. Those are ones that are growing out of the ground, and the Wagyu beef is not. You have to process it.
Yeah.
And so when you think about your construction, you just, again, to go back and think about when you're speccing a product, are you speccing something that has to be manufactured? Are you speccing something that could have grown?
Exactly. Yeah, I think the food analogy is really useful because you kind of understand the processed food or the carbon intensity of beef or the calories. Like everybody understands that. Like I think a lot of people understand how, yeah, the carbon footprint of beef is very high because cows take a long time to grow and they fart a lot. That's what's related with that. But we know this. And like, so you're vegan. I really don't eat beef anymore. And so when you bring that to the built environment, I think the other real analogy is 15 years ago, farm to table was just starting to happen. I mean, we just drove over to Bayview and back, thinking about Cumbray Farms. I remember when they first opened, beginning the farm to table, really wondering where your food comes from, the stories that your food are telling about your region and your local agriculture, like that movement in food. How do we do that in buildings?
Yeah.
Right? Because we used to have incredibly regional diets for our buildings. Like again, I'm looking at your original house, like those bricks are not coming far at all. Those are just coming over.
They probably made the brickworks.
Exactly. They're a kilometer or two away. The wood was not coming far at all. Like everything about these. Exactly. So this is your original house was very much a kind of made in Ontario, made in Canada palette of materials, yes. Right? It did not travel across the world. And now what we're building with that aluminum, statistically, 54% of the aluminum in your window would be coming from Guinea in West Africa, or Australia, 23%, or Russia, or Brazil, right? It might be smelted in Quebec, but the base ore is coming from other parts of the world. So it's traveled a distance to get here. And if we thought about our buildings again through this lens of provenance and where things come from, we'd see it really differently. And so I think that's a critical lens. And that's a lesson I learned in Rwanda, because in Rwanda, they had 18% import tax on everything. Great policy if you're a developing nation. In Central Africa, not so good a policy if the United States. And because of that, it was a relatively, as a developing nation, not all that wealthy at all, landlocked, small landlocked country, abundance of labor, lots of people there, but not a lot of domestic, like what we would typically consider like a wealth of mineral resources served for construction. And so when moving there, on the first like job that I was working on, I was drawing these big rectangles for the windows and doors for this hospital. And our cost estimator, Bruce, is like, Kelly, we can't afford what you're drawing. I'm like, well, what do you mean, Bruce? He's like, well, the glass that you're drawing, like it's so big it needs to be tempered. I'm like, okay. He's like, well, all the tempered glass is going to come from like Dubai or India. There's no one does tempered glass in East Africa. I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, and then the frames, they're going to have to be aluminum. That's also going to have to be imported. The nearest fabrication facilities in Nairobi, which is 2 countries over. Everything that then is coming into the country has 18% import tax on top of that. And then the road to the hospital, you've driven on it before, it's super bumpy. So if anything breaks along the way, like that's going to hold up construction for months. And I was like, wow, I never thought about any of this, because I'd been practicing in Canada and I always just like draw a rectangle and call a supplier, and there it is, right? I didn't really have to think about all these things before. And it was like revelatory for me of like, oh shit, like, yeah, you have to really think about where stuff comes from all of a sudden, and who's going to make it and how's it going to come together. And that lesson, like, really, it kind of was a full circle coming back to the mining. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, now I get it. Like, this part of the world is where a lot of the ore come from, but then it goes somewhere else to be processed, and it goes somewhere else to become a window frame, and then then maybe that comes back here.
Right.
And when you begin to see that, like, and how to practice. So ultimately what we did was draw smaller rectangles, use float glass, bring all the glass to site, use domestically recycled steel to get around the import tax on this steel, and every door and window was welded in the room that it hung. So you brought all your fabrication on site to get around these issues, right?
Which also helps the local economy.
And all the jobs, the employment that come with it. Yeah. So, and that was all driven, that constraint is all economical, right? It was driven by the economics of that project. And there's also the other flip there was that in Rwanda, labor was the inexpensive part and materials were expensive, which is the inverse here. And that's actually a kind of false statement too, because it's the materials are never really expensive. You're just cheap. You're paying for cheaper labor somewhere else, right? But in Rwanda, because the labor was so abundant, every decision we made was about how to maximize labor. So things that we would probably like, oh, we can't afford to do rammed earth here. We'd be like, well, we're going to do rammed earth, right? Of course we can. Or, one anecdote was instead of hiring the excavator for a day, we could hire 200 people with shovels. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to hire 200 people with shovels, right? To dig the same amount of trench for a foundation.
3 guys dug that addition.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. I mean, this is like...
They took shovels, they ground them down to make them like knives.
Really?
To cut through the clay.
Cool.
And literally in 1 week.
Where were they from?
The crew we work with on my house and a couple other they're all from the Ukraine.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so we did the analysis of cost to bring in the mini-axe.
Yep.
Or just have the guys do it. And the time difference was literally a couple days difference based on how quickly I moved dirt.
Yep.
So to your point.
There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, that was on most all the projects we were doing there. The challenge I would give our team is like, every project's an enormous amount of money to put into a community. Mm-hmm. And, in any community, if you're downtown Toronto or downtown Kigali, the millions of dollars in construction are opportunities for architects and builders to divert that money into businesses and pockets and people, right? Like that's the opportunity. And so the more we think for this kind of farm to table version of this,
yes,
then we're taking that money and we're funneling it into local businesses, local pockets. Like that's the opportunity. And so I always basically my key message to the design team would be like, all right, we got 60 million on this job. How many people can we get this money into in the country, right? And we were always tracking that part of it, like what was the financial impact of the projects, because in part because we are a nonprofit that we had to do these annual reports and like, hey, you're donating money to us and here's how that money's being spent. And then that led to environmental impacts too. That's kind of how we got into the other part of it. But, both of these things connect, like the carbon footprint and the human handprint are one and the same, right? Because your mini-X decision or the 3 Ukrainian gentlemen with the shovels for those days, like I can guarantee you which one was probably lower carbon and long-term more economically, impactful.
Well, and also led to 3 guys being able to work together in a way that they generally would not be able to work together if they're from mini-X, right? Like
there you go.
They're out there, they're talking to each other, having a good time and taking their breaks together. And there's the camaraderie that also is developed in that. So it's in many ways also helping the business because those guys become closer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's an interesting way to be able to look at the perspective of what this, I say this because, when we work at Walden in single family residential. And so there's these types of opportunities with a lot of the work that we look to contract, a different scale, obviously, but looking and analyzing what we're putting into these projects, you have my mind spinning right now.
So in the small residential space, we're for the last year almost now, we've been working with Jana Levitt and Levitt Goodman on the CMHC's housing catalog, which was announced last spring, and the details are hopefully by the time this podcast is out, it'll be out in the wild here this fall. And so we've been supporting the design teams across the country on performing energy modeling analysis, doing whole life carbon analysis. So that's basically doing your energy model and your impact of the building materials combined and seeing how emissions play out over 60 years of a house. And then in addition to that, we're providing a guidance around climate risk, resiliency, and adaptation, what you can be doing as a homeowner or a builder at the scale of the house and the property to look at long-term climate risks like wildfire, drought, flooding, parts of the country that experience these events. So what can you be doing in your property, in your house, in your interior to address those risks? But then the last thing what we added to it was a material guidance document to basically say, all right, okay, now you're coming to build this house. Here are all the insulation choices you can make. And here's the cost and the carbon footprint of all of those materials. So we, basically every part of a small house, we now will have guidance that you can immediately see the relative cost of going between one type of insulation and another, or one type of siding, one type of roofing, to get all the materials on the menu again, and have their carbon footprint right next to their cost. So that I'm super excited about that. And as a kind of follow up to that, we've just wrapped up doing a vulnerability assessment for CMHC of tariffs on those materials. So, yeah,
different scales of tariff costs.
Well, whether or not there are tariffs, but just basically the question was, all right, in a world of having tariffs on goods coming from the United States, specifically, what would that mean for this scale of construction and supply chain? And so we went down through all those materials, all the potential suppliers of those materials and manufacturing locations, and to identify across the all the things that we build our housing out of in Canada at the scale, how much of that's coming from the US and where the vulnerabilities, like where the critical vulnerabilities are. One of the main ones is glass is a key concern right now. Like there's not a domestic glass production right now is pretty much non-existent. So we've been importing. We used to make glass in Toronto. We don't anymore. We used to make it in Canada. We don't really anymore. And most of it's been coming from the United States. And now the glaziers I know are starting now to pivot to be buying glass more from Asia and Europe because of what's been happening. So when you begin to understand that part of it too, it's like, it's this decision about where we're shopping and what material you're buying. Ultimately, if you want to buy, if you want a made in Canada house, I've got good news. A lot of the lowest carbon materials are coming from Canada.
Well, I want to ask you a question about the glass specifically. Why is it that you think that the majority of manufacturers that used to exist don't exist anymore?
I had this conversation on Sunday with Jeff Neudorf of Ferguson Neudorf Glass in St. Catharines. Yeah, they were shut down. I think like there was a big Pilkington had a factory in Toronto and Ford bought it at one point, but I think it was just post NAFTA. This is one of the things that they got shut down. Is in Scarborough, I believe, not far from here. So that was one of them. There's another one in Owen Sound that he mentioned. So, not a few decades ago, we had this in the province. And then I think just, the way things have gone, where the consolidation of Pilkington buying it and then deciding to shut that down and centralizing manufacturing elsewhere. So the doors and windows on my cottage are from Lowen, good, amazing windows out of Steinbach, Manitoba that I was proudly sourcing, the Manitoba patriot that I am. And, a decade ago when I went back and to do a life cycle assessment of the cottage that I designed for my in-laws, the Lowen windows are in there. And I asked John, I'm like, hey, John, can you tell me what the carbon footprint of the windows? He's like, I've never been asked that question before, Kelly. I'm like, okay, well, can you tell me where everything comes from? And so he went to a supply team and he came back with like a list of all the components and their origin. And I was like, amazing. I was like, oh, okay. So the large tempered glass was like, it basically floated in Missouri, tempered in Collingwood, and then put in the frame in Steinbach. So that's like Missouri to Ontario to Steinbach, back past Collingwood to Haliburton, where our cottage is, right? So that's basically driven across the continent once. And then the wood was coming from Oregon or BC. Yeah. The other glass was coming from Fargo. The handles, the hardware is coming from Germany. The spacers and the gas is coming from Asia and like Ukraine. And like you can just imagine like something as simple as this door and window. This is coming from all over the world, right? Like this is coming from, I guarantee you this thing's come from 3 to 4 continents.
It's a full passport.
Yeah, it's just, so we live in this kind of globalized supply chain right now, and then you're thinking in the context we're in right now, post COVID and everything that's happening right now politically, how we onshore that again, or what decisions you can make to help onshore a lot more of that manufacturing. That's maybe a good idea. At the end of the day.
Earlier in the conversation, Kelly and I talked about metals like steel being at the very top of carbon food pyramid. Essential, but heavy in terms of carbon. It's a reminder that the way we use steel and the suppliers we choose makes a huge difference. We've been working with Henry Rotberg Steel for years. They've built their reputation on durability, precision, and service. And with steel, that matters. Because if you get it right the first time, you're not ripping things out, reordering, or wasting materials. Fewer mistakes, fewer replacements, and ultimately less carbon over the lifespan of a building. On the projects we take on, that reliability is non-negotiable. When the spec calls for steel, you want to know it's coming from a supplier who stands behind the product and helps you deliver with confidence. And that's what Henry Rotberg Steel is all about, and we love working with them at Walden Homes. Email me, Jonathan, Jonathan, at waldenhomes.ca, and I'll introduce you to Brett, their general manager, and get you started on a path forward working with a great company. But for now, again, back to Kelly.
So how many people are on your team?
We're a team of 5.
And is everybody fulfilling the same role, or there's other different roles?
Yeah, a little bit. We all do a piece of the same thing. So I co-founded the firm with Juliette Cook, she's in Montreal now, and she was a student. She was a student of mine. My 2 other business partners, Ryan and Rashmi, are both former students of mine as well. And then we have our first employee, Lakita, who was a student of theirs. So kind of, this is how we're growing. So far, we've had a couple other interns over the years, but yeah. So my business partners are all my students, and I'm based in London, and they're based in Toronto and Hamilton and Montreal. And the work we're doing is a kind of split of teaching architects how to do this, how to get it into their design process and not just be some compliance afterthought. And then working with municipal and federal governmental departments on how to procure in this way. Also guidance with a guidance document with the federal government around how to write this into RFPs and what questions to be asking your design teams. Now the federal government, creating government strategy, they're requiring life cycle assessments. So we're helping departments benchmark. So we're just starting to work with Global Affairs Canada, who build and operate our embassies abroad, to understand what's the footprint of the embassies they've been building so that they could improve upon that in the future. And so that's and portfolio level work. So working with larger institutions. We've been working with the University of Toronto the last couple of years, looking at the campus's own buildings,
Figures much, yeah.
both operationally and construction. So how can that inform future construction on site? And yeah, so we're kind of a mix of everything, of building capacity, providing guidance. One of the exciting projects we're doing right now is we're starting to work with civil engineers Parsons and landscape architects O2 on the design of the new streets and avenues of Downsview, and beginning to think about how to think about roads and the right of ways, and the kind of municipally owned spaces through this lens of like, how are we designing those spaces, right, and how are we thinking about them in terms of long-term running costs, long-term climate concerns.
What kind of random question to ask, but as you're describing those roads, I'm thinking about our Canadian winters here.
Mm-hmm. And the disappearance of them.
Yeah. Well, the last winter was it was interesting toward the end.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
but I was thinking more so about like the clearing, the snow clearing, and then salting and sanding, and
yep.
So when you look at a project like what you're describing, does that become a part of the analysis?
Absolutely. So the maintenance of our infrastructure, I think, like on infrastructure right now, in the kind of broad terms, we have way too much of it. Canadian municipalities are facing enormous deficits that we've inherited through the era of expansion of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, largely. And the amount of road we paved, the amount of water infrastructure we built, a lot of it 60 years later it's up for renewal. And cities across Canada are struggling to maintain their roads and the sheer volume of them. So what we're kind of conversation we're trying to have is, how much road do we really need right now? How much bike lane do we need? I'm an avid cyclist. What's the right amount of that? How are we looking at planting of the trees along the roads? Should we be thinking about them differently in the future? We still have winters. They're getting warmer and shorter. Our summers are getting longer and hotter. How are we thinking more about shade and heat in the future and less just on cold? Because so much of our planning has been around ideas of being a winter city. But the reality right now, it's not hard to have a conversation around heat in Toronto in August right now, where it's been over 30 for the last 3 weeks. Yeah, exactly. So the need for shade is critical right now. What species we're planting, right? Right now, if you go through the city, a lot of the trees that we have on our streets they're nearing the end of their life as well, right? A lot of the street trees.
Yeah. But to this point,
Yeah.
we have the maples out front. The whole street's littered with them, and they are all falling apart.
Because
you give a windstorm, down they come.
Yep. Because I'm pretty sure that those trees were planted more or less the same time these houses were built.
They were.
And there you go. Yeah. So, trees have life cycles too, and we see a whole bunch of trees near or at the end of their life. And how we replant, or how we plant new trees, what species we're planting, how those species are going to be ready for a hotter, drier, wetter future. Other parts of the world, like Germany and California, are already planting trees, from Italy or from Mexico, because they know they'll be heat resistant in the weather that we're going to have in 20, 30 years. And we need to be doing the same thing. And we need to be planting more of them, because we need more shade. We need more evapotranspiration. And how do we begin? We need to begin having these discussions, but back to the infrastructure piece and snow and salt and waste and the things that make the city work. All of those have not just a carbon footprint, but they then have, again, an analogous maintenance cost, right? Because the more we pave, the more we have to resurface and clear and on and on and on and on. And so I think this, right sizing our infrastructure and thinking about, modeling up for a future in terms of climate, in terms of transportation. We need to really start imagining what things will be like in 20 to 30 years and designing for that, as opposed to designing for how things have been for the last 30 years.
Yeah. So how are practices coming to you to be able to draw upon your knowledge?
Yeah, so we act as a kind of collaborative consultant. I'm an architect. I come from a design background, and I think my main message to the folks we're working with, or people we might work with in the future, is we're here to help you be a better designer and make better choices. And the work we're doing isn't about a kind of compliance box ticking exercise at the end of the project. We want to be involved throughout it and help set some goals up early, do some getting options on the table, and helping design teams, produce better buildings, produce lower cost, lower carbon buildings. So that's the work we've been doing, is supporting teams on projects and also building capacity, doing training. So even KPMB, we did a training for their office, teaching them how to do LCA, how to think about materials. That training we developed through them and a couple other firms. We since have the National Research Council funded us last year to go across the country to do in-person one-day workshops for architects and engineers and planners. So we did 10 Canadian cities and trained over 1,500 people on how to do this. And I think, again, we need everybody doing this. We need builders understanding this. We need designers, policymakers, planners understanding this, so we can really be moving things collectively. A few people doing this is not sufficient. We all need to be doing this. So I think that's really our focus is around capacity building and then supporting people on executing it.
So I got to say this just because if you're this far into the episode right now, you probably found this conversation as interesting and as engaging as I have, which is the same as what I found the first time I spoke to you, Kelly. I would highly recommend that you reach out to Kelly. I know that sometimes we're under the impression that budgets can be tight on projects, and we're always trying to figure out like how can we maximize our dollars. But bringing on the right consultant, it's nice to be able to bring on consultants that are going to do really nice things for a house.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you can get those nice things when there's also some thought that goes into how the envelope is going to work and perform. So I would, again, highly recommend you reach out to Kelly. Small little plug.
Thank you. Yeah.
Because it's really, really fascinating work. And I think that anyone that truly cares about the impact of design and how it can make you feel and how you appreciate it knowing that you're in it, especially if you are inside of a building that you see as a low efficiency, high efficiency but low carbon footprint building.
Yeah,
there's an inherent good value.
and I think that like there's other things on top of it, like health, human health, material health. The reality is we are what we eat. We are what we live in. So much of our health is determined by materials that surround us and that we breathe and we touch all the time. And so this too is a kind of piece in this, the healthy materials. My business partner Juliet there's a course at Parsons in New York around healthy materials. Again, it's another lens to look through it, but like I particularly have I'm not alone in this, but how do we get plastics out of our built environment? Because they're everywhere. They're probably in the floor. They're definitely on the paint. They're on your light switch. They're in the doors. They are all around us, plastics, and they're known carcinogens. We have been inundated by the plastic. The plastics industry is everywhere in construction, and it wasn't 60 years ago, right? Like that again. Your original house didn't have any plastic in it. I hazard a guess, right? And this is like, how do we get plastics out of our building? Is a key concern from a climate perspective, but from a human health perspective as well.
Isn't fuel also like
the fuels that we use? Yeah, I mean, let's try to get
it's in everything too, isn't it?
Well, that's absolutely for the petroleum is like a big source of the carbon footprint of the material, right? So, I mean, this is another reason why sourcing Canadian is a good idea, because if you're a manufacturer in Ontario or Quebec or Manitoba or British Columbia, historically we've invested in nuclear power and hydroelectric power. And so, the electricity right now humming in the background of recording our session, it's got a really low carbon footprint relative to if we were recording this podcast in Texas, it'd be a lot higher carbon footprint because, that part of the United States, it's got some wind and solar, but it's still largely coal fired and gas fired. And so that's the same with other parts of the world, like much of Chinese production is still coal fired, right? Though they're rapidly scaling up the renewables, there's a lot of the parts of the world, specifically United States compared to Canada, power in Canada is way greener, less carbon intensive. And so if you're making anything, if you have a factory, for instance, and it's in Ontario, it's going to produce lower carbon goods simply through you're doing your processing on our power. So, as a kind of like, if I ever run for prime minister or anybody listening, like this is bringing Ontario jobs, bringing Quebec jobs. If we encourage low carbon construction and low carbon procurement, it's going to funnel to Canadian manufacturing and suppliers who are sitting on our low carbon grids. It's good for us if we establish trade relationships with Europe, the countries in Europe like France, like Denmark that require low carbon construction, and they're looking, and Belgium, like much of the EU now is going to have LCA as a requirement. So these countries are going to be looking for suppliers with low carbon materials. Guess what? That could be Canada, right? We could be exporting a ton to the EU and to parts of Europe, again, simply because we have a big advantage here. We have the advantage of, historically investing in hydro and nuclear, and we have the advantage of a lot of farms, a lot of fields, places we can grow material here.
Ontario, I mean, the province of Ontario is bigger than what, I don't know how many countries in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And and yet our forestry sector, has waned in years. So that's I think these are the opportunities we have right now of how to connect the kind of political reality we're in and the need to create housing and marry our need for housing, how we change our immigration laws to be pushed towards trades and manufacturing in the future to begin to build the buildings of the supply chain that can house ourselves and house other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, so we have covered a lot. Find my mind exploding right now.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's a good thing. This is kind of what I was anticipating. You touched on something before, because I want to go into the personal side of things now.
Mm.
You touched on something before, saying you're an avid cyclist.
Yeah.
So what does that look like for you?
Well, I wish I'd work from home, so I'd like to cycle a lot more. I live in London. It's pretty flat. I don't have the ravine system you have that we covered earlier, but
it wasn't online.
Yeah, but when I do rent an office space from a firm in Shoreditch, so I do get to bike into work every once in a while. So I've got a Brompton and I've got a single speed. The advantages of both are you can take your Brompton on the tube if you can't make it home in time. So I mean, ride my bike a lot in the city. I think one of the massive benefits of living in London right now and having two little kids is how non-car dependent our life is. It's like probably what I like most about it. I don't drive anywhere. We walk, we bike, we take the train everywhere we go, or the tube or the overground. Yeah. So, that part of the life, I think, like there's the benefits of density, the benefits that come with density are something I really appreciate. And, I can imagine, that I pay a lot of attention to Toronto's municipal politics, and I'd love to talk about bike lanes if you're up for it. But again, where we're going in the future, we need to decarbonize, and so we can't EVs are part of the solution, but they're not the solution because EVs have very high upfront carbon. Right, they're heavier and they require batteries that come from again mines and parts of the world that people are not thinking about.
What happens to those when the cars are end of life?
Exactly.
Straight into a fill with a battery in it.
Yes. So that's not the root problem. The root problem is we don't have other transportation options necessarily. Or we should be cycling more, or we should be using a lot more e-bikes, and we should be building our infrastructure to enable and empower that, right? Not fight against it. Absolutely. And then the second piece, I think the fundamental challenge we have right now in Canada and North America is density, right? If we need to build, you name the number of houses, if it's 3.5 million, where and how we build that housing is critical to get right? We need to have a politics and a cultural desire for density. That is the key challenge right now. How do we create the politics in favor of density? How do we get over NIMBYism?
Right.
Because let's look at the future here. The world's going to hot up. People are going to continue to migrate, and Canada is going to be one of the places that people are going to migrate to. And Ontario and Toronto specifically is, this is where a lot of that livable area is going to be. And so, the city is going to double or triple in our lifetime. That's safe to say. And how do we do that in a kind of managed way and not a haphazard way, I think is a key challenge. How do we design for that? How do we design for a city 3 times the size we are? That's a great opportunity, right? And what's in the way right now, though, is I think we've got a mentality that is very much the single family house Canadian dream, which has been the dream, right? I think I grew up in a house like yours. Most of Canada, this is what we aspired to. And that needs to change. We can't live like this anymore. We can't have that as the dream for young people. We need to live in apartments and courtyards, and we need to live frankly, like I do in Europe. And the density, what that density enables is investment in public transportation. You too could have an overground, you too could have a subway. Well, you will have a subway pretty soon, but more of it, right? Maybe, yeah, maybe in 15 years. But the kind of abundance of transportation options I enjoy in London,
Right.
we need that in Toronto.
Yeah.
And the way to create that is through a politics that's in favor of that investment, and see how's that investment in transportation is tied to a more uniformly distributed form of density.
Hmm. I think you said something before that I actually found really interesting, and that was that as the summers here continue to extend and the heat continues to extend, and you need more shade. It's funny because the majority of people that are vehemently against density are complaining that they're going to lose their sun,
Mm-hmm.
right? In neighborhoods. When you think about the reality of it, it's like when you go outside nowadays, the sun's so hot, all you want is shade.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Watch you shake your head.
it's one of the tools that NIMBYs like to use. Yeah, shadow. And shade's our friend. Shade and shadow are going to be our friend. You still have your sunlight. Good news, the sun travels across the sky over the course of the day. So you too can have sunlight and shade. We can have it both.
And you can have something affordable that like the future generation's going to be able to live in.
Absolutely.
When you eventually don't want to live in your single family home because you have a staircase that you can't get up anymore and you haven't converted it into have a bedroom on the main floor,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have to go into that rental apartment or condo.
Absolutely.
And so you better hope they have enough.
Yeah, I mean, this is the types of housing right now. The options are, it's either it's Spiky City. It's like it's either a tower at the corner of Yonge and Eglinton or whatever the nearest tower was that we saw.
Yeah.
It's either the tower or it's a single family home. Like that's what Toronto is right now. That's what Vancouver is. That's what Winnipeg could aspire to have some towers. We got a couple, but it's everything is low rise or tall, and that whole missing middle component, that 4, 6, 8-story built form that constitutes most of the rest of the world, frankly, Asia, Europe, North Africa, Middle Eastern, like historically, that's kind of the scale of construction that you had, because it's good uniform density, 4 to 6 stories, right?
I've got to add to this, and that is to say that given what we're talking about in the missing middle and what the majority of the world sees, by the time this is now out, you could go to our YouTube channel and you can watch our first roundtable series that was about missing middle. And the missing middle applies not just to Toronto. This applies to pretty much all of North America and every major city throughout North America.
Absolutely.
I would highly recommend going and watching that because you're going to learn a lot. It's directly in line with what Kelly's been saying now. I want to actually have Kelly on the panel so he wasn't in town.
Yeah, it's basically, it's a scale of housing, because if your street, just imagine there was 4-story, just imagine that you reduce your setback at the front. You don't need the front setback. Or imagine you get rid, your house is semi-detached. Imagine if you didn't have to have a side yard, so you can be fully attached. Friends of mine just came out with Impossible Toronto looking at courtyard blocks. So you could have a building at the front, and the building we're in back here could also be 4 stories, right? You could have a 4-story garden suite. Why not? And the entire space we're looking out into could be shared outdoor space, could be semi-private to the ground floors, et cetera, et cetera. You could house you could house 7 more families on your site.
Yes.
Comfortably,
yes.
Very comfortably. And that scale of construction could all be wood framed. Could be, you guys could build it, no problem. It would be very low cost, and could add, overnight, you could have 7 times more families on your street. Okay, maybe that sounds scary, but what does that mean? It's like, okay, well, now that's 7 times more people who want to have a shop at the corner and a coffee like that the end of your street, you can imagine you would actually might have a shop, and we wouldn't need to drive to Bayview to get a lot of that stuff.
Yes.
And that is what my life looks like in London, right? I've got all these things on my corner.
That's what life looks like in a lot of places.
Exactly. I feel like as Canadians, we go for vacations in these places. We're like, oh, it was great.
Yeah.
We walked everywhere, like the best food in our little neighborhood, you name it, France, Italy, Spain, wherever, England, wherever people went. And then, well, now we're back in Canada. That was nice. Maybe next year, like we can have nice things too.
Earlier, Kelly made the point that some of the best design lessons come from nature, and that working with natural systems is often the smartest way forward. It stuck with me because it's not just true for buildings or streets, it's true even in the spaces we create for rest and enjoyment. One of the companies I come across, Aquanta Pools, has taken that idea seriously. Their pools are designed with biodesign principles using natural filtration, lighter chemical footprints, and forms that sit in the landscape instead of fight against it. It's a reminder that the same values we've been talking about, durability, respect for resources, harmony with place, can show up anywhere, even in something as simple as a pool. To learn more about Aquanta, email me. It's Jonathan, Jonathan, at waldenhomes.ca, and I'll introduce you to Yuri, and you can find out more for yourself, because I found it fascinating the first time I heard about it. But now, let's get to the final stretch with Kelly.
What's also interesting, I guess, in some capacities, not ton, but anyhow, I'll leave all the time. People value time here in a different way. Some capacity. I could be wrong about that, but I think so. I feel like people here, they feel the constant need to press and rush.
Yes.
They don't leave the time to be able to go for the walk to the store because they have the immediacy of the vehicle to be able to go and get there.
Interesting.
And I am 100% a victim of that.
Yeah. I was listening to Derek Thompson's podcast yesterday. He had a psychologist not talking about there's like a term for this exact thing in North America and how much more stressed out we are. The whole episode was about, generally like where North America, the United States is right now psychologically. And I think like our politics and our well-being is really undermined by, the amount of time we spend in cars, as opposed to walking and interacting in more human ways. Like I behave horribly when I'm in a car compared to if I was just walking, right? I wouldn't be yelling and honking at the person in front of me. I'd be like, oh, I'm sorry. Hey, excuse me. But in the car, it's like, you get angry. The kind of what this does to us in aggregation. You're just like, oh, now I'm going to go from my house, get into my car, go to another air conditioned space, get back to my car, as opposed to, I just going to go walk around the block and get something, right? It's, again, we could have something different. We could, if we wanted that other thing, if we could imagine wanting that, we could easily have it. It's so within reach. And just, I have this conversation with my parents and my in-laws who, very similar settings. It's like, just imagine if you're aging, just imagine if you'd walk around your block and you had stuff to go to as opposed to just this kind of boring 80s subdivision that we're in, that you're just walking in the same loop every day. There's nothing along that loop except for maybe somebody's in their front yard watering their grass that you maybe might know. But if you had a neighborhood with amenities in it, and all the other things that you'd want to get to, we could have that. And
which is part of what I'm excited about, because as we were driving earlier, just before we started this recording, we were seeing that, building going up on Bayview, and there's a beautiful retiring residence that's going up on Laird around the corner from where I live.
Yeah.
And you're starting to see the infiltration of the non-high rise.
Yeah.
The 8-story, 10-story building.
The mid-rise.
The mid-rise that is fulfilling the needs. And, we just have another one. It's, I don't know, it's probably like 20 stories at the corner over here. But the way that it steps back from the roads, at the road, it looks the same as everything else, and then carries backwards toward the other commercial area. And why I say this is because now one of the local coffee shops that was in a really rundown old building,
moving into it,
moved in, and set up at the base, and they're so busy, because the community wants it,
and they
just knowing that they want it,
and they got a bunch of new customers as well, right?
Oh, tons.
And that, I think, seeing that happening on Bayview, on the major streets and avenues, that's like a first step.
Yeah.
And then not limiting it to there, but bringing it everywhere. I would love to see 4 stories as of right across the entire city, right? Like eliminating all side setbacks, reducing your front setback, this is the type of like zoning reform that we need.
So you're probably listening to this right now, Jason.
Yeah, exactly. Hello, Jason. Hello, Mayor Chow. You don't want unlock housing, get rid of your setbacks.
Get rid of the setbacks.
Yeah. Increase your coverage, do force. I mean, the fact that the whole multiplex, the sixplex thing only being a 9 of 26 wards or what have you. I mean, it's short-sighted for sure. It's exactly the kind of NIMBYist politics I'm talking about. Like, there's not a politics in the majority of the city of Toronto that supports density, evidently, right? Or you would have, as of right, sixplexes everywhere. But sixplexes are not enough. They are a kind of like stepping stone to it. Like that, I'm talking about the house we just described is a 8 to 12 plex, right? That's the kind of density we need to see.
Yeah. I mean, look, Janet did it.
Yeah,
as an example.
Exactly.
Start. Kelly, man, thank you so much for coming. I'm so happy that we were able to set this up.
Yeah.
On the trip that you had into here. We're gonna find a way. We're gonna have you back on, talk more about this. There's this whole other roundtable series that I'm gonna be working on building out, and I want to have you on there. For anyone that has made it all this way through, I highly recommend going to Kelly's website. I'll have that in liner notes for the show. So when you're listening to this on Spotify, if you're listening to this on Apple, YouTube, wherever you're going to consume it, check the liner notes. You'll see his website there. In addition to that, we'll show some of the work that he's been affiliated with through our Instagram account. You can look for it online on Instagram. It's a blue handle with some white writing says behind the build. Kelly, greatly appreciate you taking the time for this thing.
Amazing. Thanks for your invitation and much appreciated, and look forward to hearing from anybody. We're here to work with people, so please do reach out.